I'm Wayne Epps with the Richmond Times Dispatch here with Zach Joaquin. We're here with another episode of Ram Talk with the RTD to break down VCU's season, look back at sort of a glass half full approach and a glass half empty approach to how VCU played overall this year. But first, we're going to start with the Wake Forest game in the NIT. So we talked last week about the Princeton game in the first round. VCU obviously won that game to advance to a Saturday game at Wake Forest. So VCU was seeded third, Wake Forest was seeded second. So a higher seed, Wake Forest hosted that game. And Wake Forest, we talked about last week, one of the most dangerous offensive teams in the country. They tied for the league in scoring in ACC play. And it had some really strong transfers led by the ACC Player of the Year, Alonnis Williams. So that was already going to be a challenge. VCU obviously had defended some really strong offensive teams already this year, led by Davidson, UMass even, Dayton. But that was a challenge just with Wake Forest's size. But at the same time, VCU kind of kept that game competitive, but the Achilles heel again was the turnovers, particularly in that first half, and then in the second half, the fouling. And though VCU kind of stayed within striking distance for most of the game, they just had a rough field goal drought during the final stretch and couldn't get quite close enough. And
how long was it?
Away.
Again, 9-something minutes.
9:32. From 11:32 to 2 minutes to play.
It was painful too because there was a lot of fouls in there.
Yeah,
and so it was a very long 9:32. It was much more than actual 9:32.
It was a long game in general because it's like 2 hours and 17 minutes. So that's like a overtime game. That was a regulation. So
many turnovers in the first half and then so many fouls in the second half.
Yeah. So
it's choppy.
So talked about it in the Richmond game, when they lost in the A-10 tournament. Mike Rose brought it up as far as those being the Achilles heel, fouling and turnovers, and it creeped up in a bad spot there, and then it finally, in what turned out to be the final game of the season, creeped up again and kind of ended a VCU season. A big factor were those two things. So Wake Forest went 17 of 23 from the free throw line that second half, and VCU cut the lead to three different times in the final, 11:32.
Hung around the whole way, right? It never really felt like until that 10, 11-point margin with a minute or two to go that was the only point that it really felt like they were out of it.
Exactly. So, it's one of those things where, when those problems, when you don't rectify those, they're going to continue to bite, and then they did. And so, VC missed out on a chance to go out to play at Texas A&M in the quarterfinals. Ended up finishing the season 22-10. The second 21 season for Mike Rhodes, and his fifth season at VCU. So, just to hop right into, I guess, the overall season outlook, we'll start kind of breaking down the season from first to the more optimistic view, sort of the things they did well, our glass half full look at it.
Which is not hard to look at it in a positive. There's a lot of positives. They outplayed expectations.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of positives to come away with here.
I agree. And I'm glad you mentioned that because, Mike Rose said, after the Princeton game and after the Wake Forest game, just about how this group kind of overachieved a little bit. You just think about all the questions that were heading into the year. Ace was on the shelf still. It was looking like he wouldn't be back until January.
If this team has Ace for the whole year, it's not inconceivable to say that they're in the NCAA tournament.
100%, yeah. Those offensive metrics would have been a lot better than they were. And then, obviously not having Jameer, who's going to be a starter and had a chance to be a big-time two-way player for them. And so, in some instances, they did overachieve. And so, with that glass half full look at it, you can't start anywhere else but the defense. The defense, arguably the best defense that VCU has had under Mike Rhodes. They finished 7th in KenPom's adjusted defensive efficiency stat, 88.9 points allowed per 100 possessions. That matched the 18-19 team, which also was one of Rhodes' top defenses. That team famously held George Mason to 36 points, and when they locked up the regular season title that year and won 12 straight heading into the A-10 tournament. So this year's defense is right up there. I remember asking Mike Rhodes about it heading into the A-10 tournament. He felt like this year's team and the 18-19 team, as far as defense, were very similar, but he felt like this year's team was maybe better in the half court and the 18-19 team was better in the press. But as far as some of those metrics, this year's team, honestly, before the last couple of games, they were better in a lot of statistical categories in that 18-19 team. They kind of slipped in some categories, and so that's why they finished 7th, which matched the 18-19 team in that adjusted defensive efficiency. But this year's team was really playing at a high clip, but some of that three-point defense slipped a little bit late, and I think that kind of affected some of the numbers. But
Played a couple of really good 3-point shooting teams late on too. That's probably part of it.
Yeah,
in Wake and Princeton.
Very true. And then another part of it was the fouling, which with the playing good defense, as Rosa said, you have to do it with discipline, and sometimes that kind of wavers at certain points, and the teams get put on the line for a lot of foul shots, and obviously that in close games like VCU has played a lot of, that makes a difference. And so VCU was 314th nationally with 18.7 fouls per game, and so that's not a number that you want in that category.
When VCU is really good, it's when they get refs that let them play. And I'm not
that's
blaming
true.
that on
That's
the
true.
officiating. That's always a balance that you have to be aware of. Or some teams are just better at playing without fouling, and VCU has not been great at playing without fouling, and that's very much a part of that. But you also get different officiating crews that call games differently, and VCU really struggles when they get officials who want to call a game tight and call hand checking and stuff like that. And against Wake Forest, it was called pretty tight.
It was, and it brought me back to the battle for Atlantis, where I feel like they made a big impression, even if they were kind of struggling offensively back then. They made a big impression in the way they defended Baylor and the way they defended UConn. But that UConn game in particular was full of fouls. And so maybe you say if they had defended or fouled less or less whistles in that game, that could have been a close game. Obviously, that game ended up going to overtime. They lost that game, but that played a big part, I think, in that. And again, playing another sort of high major team in Wake Forest, that again bit them again on Saturday. So
I think the VCU fan base takes a lot of pride in how VCU plays. That might sound obvious, but I think that's one of the biggest glass half full things that I'd come away from this season. I mean, we're talking about how good the defense was, and that's very on brand. And so even if you didn't necessarily reach the goals that you'd hope for toward the end of the year when this team was so hot, felt like they were capable of, it feels like, in that win streak there toward the end of the year, we all had NCAA tournament hopes. And now to go out in the second round of the NIT feels like a little bit of a letdown. But you also come away, I think, with that sense of pride that you do most seasons as a VCU fan. And like, this team was still not fun to play. I imagine if you asked Wake Forest, they would say that was one of the more frustrating teams that we played all year. Because they're so good defensively and there's so much activity and length. And that's definitely a point of pride to come away with in the season. I hope that the team and the coaching staff does the same way.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, mentioning that Coach Steve Forbes at Wake Forest said after the game that VCU is one of the best teams to come into their arena all year. So he definitely kind of praised VCU for the way they played.
Means a lot from an ACC coach.
Exactly, yeah. Especially a team that
really
played as well
teams.
as they had. Yeah.
They look like an NCAA tournament team to me. They got a tough.
I know.
Their announcers talking about their resume a good bit throughout the year. They didn't really have any bad losses. They look like an NCAA tournament team to me.
I agree. Yeah. They had, just like VCU, they had some work to do heading into ACC tournament, and like VCU losing their first game to BC, that really hurt them. But you say they win one or two more games, they could have been looking at a tournament picture. And their turnaround, not to go too off on a tangent, but that turnaround was pretty impressive. They brought in some big time transfers, including Williams, and had a big turnaround this year. I think I read they were top 5 seed in the ACC tournament for the first time since 2010. And so that's pretty impressive and for the second year. So that was a tough team. And so for VC to play the way they did, even with their issues, it was impressive too.
Williams was fun to watch. He's a really creative offensive player. Went dunk contest there at the end too, and almost left the door open for VCU. That was part of the reason it ended up being only a 6-point margin. Because he had he hit the first one, and then the second one, I think, bounced off the back of the rim, and his coach was not happy. But he was a lot of fun to watch. The term "in his bag" came to mind a few times during that game. Just a really creative offensive skill set and a fun player to watch.
I think he's gonna have a bright future at the next level too, just because he's a big guard, and I think his pro future is gonna be bright for sure.
One last point I wanted to throw in about the defense. That delayed double on the press that Mike Rhodes loves so much, that can be so effective for VCU, even when you don't create turnovers, you speed the other offense up. You make them initiate their offense with 20 seconds or less on the shot clock, right? And you get the ball out of the primary ball handler's hands a lot of the time, and it just throws offenses out of rhythm even when you're not creating turnovers. I've seen a lot of high school teams replicate that. I don't know if that's a coincidence. Maybe it was something that they were doing before, but in my high school coverage this winter, I saw a lot of local high school teams playing that similar delayed press, where you're trying to get the ball handler into one of the corners, and then you bring a big to double on them. And get the ball out of the primary ball handler's hands. And it seems to be it's obviously really effective for VCU, and I've seen a lot of local coaches trying to emulate that.
That's interesting, the VCU influence. And I think that's a style, one thing the coaching staff at VCU talked about a lot as far as recruiting. I think that's a style that players want to play. They want to play aggressively. I think it's fun to play in, maybe funner than playing in like a zone heavy system or something like that, because in a system like that, like you get to really put your athleticism on display, type of thing. And I think scoring in transition is funner sometimes than playing out of the half court as well. So being able to create those turnovers, it's a fun style to play. So I think if you're kind of grooming your players at the high school level first, then that helps set you up to go to a program like that too.
Absolutely.
So that's really cool to see. So kind of off that too, heading to our next point as far as the young players that VCU had, the 3 freshmen this year, Jaden Nunn, Jalen Deloach, and Nick Kern. I think we saw a lot of positive things out of all 3. They led by Jaden because he was kind of, as the staff has said, thrown into the fire to begin with, because he had to step into the starting point guard spot at the beginning of the year with Ace still out, and he played well for a freshman
he grew up
in
fast.
that spot. Yeah, he really did. And overall, he kind of shifted to that 2-guard spot when Ace did come back and still stay in the starting lineup.
Which definitely fits him better. He is a 2-guard, right? He's better when he can play off the ball more.
Yeah, 100%. So, as a freshman starting, 28 of his 30 appearances, like that's impressive.
Yeah.
We saw, I think, him become even more confident the second half of the year as a scorer. I mentioned it here before. His game reminds me of Marcus Evans. Just the way he's able to create and score in the mid-range game as well.
I think he's a better 3-point shooter though.
Yeah.
Than Marcus was. Marcus was really a mid-range jump shooter that didn't hit a whole lot of threes, but Jaden can step it out around the perimeter more.
Yeah, and his handles are very strong too to create his own shot too, which I think. VCU maybe needed, because Bones was a very much a quick off the dribble scorer last year. I think Jaden is going to mature even more into that type of guy. We saw glimpses of that this year. I think that's very important as well.
He's definitely your get me a bucket guy going into next year, right? Late in the game, when you might be struggling offensively and you don't have flow and you're not creating shots just based on your schemes, you can just let him ISO. And try and attack someone who can create a basket for you.
Yeah, I think like you said, I think he is that last shot
your
guy.
Bailout guy.
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
exactly. It was fun to watch his progression, and he's a strong defender too in that press at the top of the press too. So very, very talented freshman. And then Jan Deloach, interior player. I was in Deloach and Kern didn't play quite as much as Nunn, but Deloach got some quality minutes and had some quality play. His offensive rebound percentage led the team, and his defensive rebound percentage was second on the team, just behind Hassan Ward.
Really showed against Wake too. He had some great minutes there in the second half.
100%, and he's a very strong finisher at the rim too. We've seen him like with guys on him be able to elevate and finish at the rim very strongly as well. Uses his length very well. And so I think that was important for VCU because I think as he continues to grow older, being a consistent scorer inside, I think that's something that VCU is always trying to find. I think he showed glimpses of that this year too.
For a team that has at times struggled in the rebounding battle as well, right? Over the year, I think he was probably a huge piece going into next year. What was his line? 7 points, 8 rebounds.
Yeah.
For that game, you would expect in 15 minutes, you would expect a lot more lines like that from him going into next year.
100%. And he could be a guy, you look to maybe as a potential starter next year, maybe next to Hassan in the front court, looking ahead to next year. So he did some really good things. And Nick Kern played a little less, but played with a lot of energy, though, in the minutes that he did get. I think that was one of the I remember Mike Rose talking about, I believe it was after the Black and Gold game, he felt like Kern was going to easily become a fan favorite pretty quickly. And I think he did because of the energy that he played with, like just flying all over the court. Playing with great effort.
Seems like a VCU guy.
Exactly, yeah. And he showed that very early. When I remember he had an impressive block and transition against Duquesne last month on a fast break. He caught up to the guy and stuffed him at the basket. So that's a VCU type of play, playing with that type of effort.
Those chase down blocks show great defensive instinct too.
Yeah, and athleticism too. So I think he's going to earn himself more minutes next year in the rotation because of that energy that he plays with. That's the type of thing that gets you minutes at VCU. So. I think his season was very promising too.
How would you define his skill set? What position is he? He's a wing, right?
Yeah,
he's kind of a tweener.
Yeah, I think like a 2 or a 3.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously a lot of times he was kind of backing up Keyshawn, who also played the 2 or the 3 depending on who else was in the game. So like for instance against Richmond at the Siegel Center when Keyshawn got hurt, Nick came in and defended Tyler Burton really well.
Okay.
Came in behind Keyshawn when he was hurt there. So it's kind of interchangeable. I think either the 2 or the 3, like a wing or bigger guard type of guy. So I think he'll slot in maybe most likely at the 3 moving forward.
Okay.
As with Ace and Jaden in the backcourt. But yeah, he's a versatile guy, which VCU likes. Like, I think they're more and more you've seen it with the way they recruited. They like the positions this kind of guys,
Absolutely.
particularly in the 1 through 3 or 1 through 4. When you look at Vince playing the 4 as a smaller 4 too, so I think Nick fits in that description as well. So talking about Ace too, that was our third point under glass half full. I think his progression this year, was obviously very apparent. He, as Michael said multiple times, it was VCU's rudder this year. Averaged 11.4 points, up from 6.7 last year. And just the difference was just so noticeable when he came back. Just the way the offense ran, his ability to distribute, to get guys involved. But also, I think you saw him balance that pretty well with his own ability to score. So again, mentioning how he averages 11.4 points, which was second on the team, too. I think you just saw him become more comfortable being that guy. Like last year, I think he kind of deferred a little bit to Bones, but this year being more of that guy, and knowing that, I think he saw him become more confident in that. So that was cool to see as well.
He and Jaden seems like a perfect fit at the 1 and the 2, right? For them to play together a lot in the backcourt going forward. What are the next steps in Ace's game? I think that we'd like to see progression-wise, more consistent from 3.
Yeah,
I would think he's a bit of a streaky 3-point shooter.
Right.
But he's just a fantastic ball handler and decision maker. Not a great game against Wake, probably one of his worst games of the season.
Yeah.
And you can see, I think some of the struggles early in the season, you could see kind of manifest in that last game, that when Ace is not protecting the ball well and not making good decisions with directing the offense, then it kind of, everyone else struggles, and VCU collectively struggles to protect the ball when Ace is not doing that well, and he didn't do that great against Wake, and you ended up with 18 turnovers for the game.
Yeah. I think, as good of a distributor as he is, and he'll do some amazing, passes, amazing dump offs.
He tries really hard sometimes.
He gets guys some great shots, some great looks. But on the flip side of that, sometimes some of those are a little maybe unrealistic passes, or just passes that are just too ambitious, and that's what leads to his high turnover rate sometimes as well too. So I think that is one of those next steps he can take as he moves into an upper class for next year as a junior, is just cutting down on those unrealistic passes, just taking what comes to him on a fast break.
And it's a big ask for a young guard in a VCU system where you want to play fast and you want to push the ball. You get in a lot of those situations, right, where you're in transition and you want to make those, those passes under the basket to your cutting wing, and you want to really get flying up and down the court, and it's easy to turn the ball over in those situations. So it's a big ask. And I think collectively, you would say that Ace had a fantastic season, right? Especially coming back from the injury. But you would like more consistency in terms of protecting the ball. But that's VCU collectively. That's not just Ace, but your point guard, obviously everyone else kind of. That's where it starts, protecting the ball.
Yeah. And I think we've seen him kind of in an intangible sense, kind of, as I mentioned, grow as a leader. I think the guys kind of really look up to him. Even the older guys kind of look up to him, and he's kind of that motor for the team. And, asking Vince about his outlook on next year after Saturday's game, he mentioned that he feels like Ace is going to be leading the way next year. And so it's that vote of confidence from a senior to a sophomore. I think all the guys kind of follow Ace's lead.
Got a lot of respect from his teammates.
Yeah, which is big. Especially you want that from your point guard.
Absolutely.
So that's huge. Which, side note, I want to mention, Vince has left the door open on a possible return.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I mean, he's getting a lot of NBA attention right now, as far as some people looking at him for making a jump to the next level. He obviously has that extra year he can use if he wants. He mentioned after Saturday's game he's going to have to sit down and talk to the coaches about that. So that avenue is open for him if he wants. He obviously had a career this year. So if I had to guess, I would say he doesn't come back. But again, that door is still open. And so you think about, I think this team is going to be talented without him. But next year, I think with him, this team has a chance to be.
Absolutely. The broadcast talked a lot about how much he's been in the gym over the past year and how much he's set an example for everyone else. And it seemed like, on the court, it was obvious, but off the court throughout the year as well, it was clear how much everyone looks up to him and how he very much became the emotional leader for this team. And I think that his commitment is something that I would point to that as maybe the key reason that this team outperformed expectations this year, right? Is how well Vince played and how much everyone looked up to him and how he set an example for all the other kids on a team that's relatively young outside of him, right? It's wishful thinking, to want him to come back. I think we all want him to do what's best for him. And if he's getting NBA interest right now, then the best thing for him is probably to make that jump and capitalize on how great he played this year. But man, if he did come back,
that's a dangerous team.
Yeah, it's a dangerous team if he came back.
Yeah. So moving ahead to the not so great things this year, the glass half empty look at got to start just like we started with defense on the glass half full, glass half empty, just the turnovers.
We said we weren't going to say turnovers too many times in the show because it's easy to harp on that.
Yeah, but 15.1 turnovers per game. That's 327th nationally, so that's towards the bottom of every team in Division I.
What's the total again for teams in Division I?
It's in the 350s.
Okay, so there's not that many teams that are worse than them.
Yeah, no. So yeah, Rose is multiple times again called the turnovers and the fouling an Achilles heel this year. And so the turnovers hurt on Saturday. They've hurt at different points throughout the year. They've obviously won in spite of those for many games this year. They had the 8-game win streak heading into the regular season finale at St. Louis. But it just seems like an inopportune times, like against the Richmond NIT Tournament, like against Wake Forest and the NIT, those types of things creep up. And so in a one and done situation, like you can't really afford that. So
probably a good teaching tool. Though you would think if you asked Rhodes, he would probably say you obviously don't want to end the season that way, but when your two big fouling and turnovers Achilles heels pop up that much in the last game of the season, it's easy now throughout the offseason to point to those and to emphasize those in your drills and in your schematic conversations. So hopefully he's able to use that as a teaching tool because it really was very obvious in that last game. BCU could have won that game.
Yeah.
If you just don't give such a good offensive team that many opportunities to get into a rhythm.
Yeah. So, one thing going back to even before the season that the coaching staff talked about, they wanted their turnover rate to be like under 17%, which they kind of equate to like around 12 per game, but 12 turnovers per game or less. So again, sitting right there at 15, that's like 3 turnovers per game less. So I think that's doable, but it's I think which they have done that at points this year. Just doing it consistently would be the biggest thing. So like you said, I think it could be maybe a teaching tool heading to next year to work on that.
Maturity of Ace and Jaden in the backcourt too. Those kids have the tools to protect the ball a lot better. They have the decision making and the ball handling. So the tools are definitely there for this team to not be nearly as bad at turning the ball over.
Agreed. Rebounding. VCU is next to last in the league in turnover and total rebounds per game. They were 11th in rebound margin at minus 1.9. And so I think we've seen different points throughout the year too, just allowing teams extra possessions has hurt them as well, some of those second chance opportunities. And so I think that's one thing. Just again, mentioning Jalen's continued growth.
He's a really good rebounder, so you would hope that activity around the basket is something that can become more prominent as he gets more minutes next year.
Right, and Hassan too. Like Hassan had a little bit of a down year. I think part of it was injuries. Like he I think injured both ankles at different points of the year. He had a little bit of stretch there where he caught fire like late January into February, but it just wasn't necessarily consistent.
He has so much length. I think that sometimes he gets pushed around by stronger, stockier bigs. So maybe putting some pounds on in the offseason could help him in that regard.
Yeah, agreed. But I think they're going to need better rebounding from him too next year because he's going to be that guy next year too as far as front court players as a senior. So they're definitely going to need that for him next year. I think part of this too, we're going to get to this later, but they had 3 guys so far who are transferring out. When you look at guys who are going to be coming in to fill those slots, I think they're going to have to get another big, maybe a la Levi, who can be that sort of stout presence down low, or sort of that anchor big as they call Levi sometimes. So it'll be interesting to see if that's who they go after. I think they will need to, particularly with Mikael Brown-Jones being one of those transfers too, to help in that rebounding area. So that'll be interesting to follow as well.
That one was. We're about to touch on that in the next one too, but that one was disappointing. Marcus Sahonis. And Jimmy Nichols didn't surprise you. I think that everyone could have seen those coming, right? Yeah. It felt like, especially Nichols, it wasn't a great fit all year, and he didn't get a whole lot of minutes. Marcus had some good minutes there early in the season when he was filling in for Ace, but then once Ace came back, it kind of slowly trickled away for him. Mikael is the really disappointing one. We saw some really promising things from him this year, and I think everyone was disappointed to see him leave.
Yeah, I think when we talk about sort of ECU guys, I think he fit that mold as well.
Like he was,
it just, for whatever reason, he didn't have consistent playing time. But he had some big moments. Like I think one of the standout images when you look at his VCU highlight reel over his 2 years was that block of Luka Brajkovic. Was like this time winding down at Davidson for them to help win that game, which was a huge win for VCU. And that win was a big reason why VCU was in the NCAA tournament double picture to begin with. So that was a huge play of the season. He had 11 second half points and 11 second half minutes against Richmond in the 20-point win they had against them at the Sickle Center.
A Davidson team that it should be said played well in their one NCAA tournament game, almost beat Michigan State.
Yeah.
Even though they were one and done, I would say that it was a really good showing for the A-10 for the two teams that were there. Richmond obviously taking down Iowa, and then Davidson looked really good in its one game.
Yeah,
so.
they did. But that was a huge play and a huge win for sure. And then he had a career high 15 points against George Mason as well. But then again, just like his playing time just wasn't very consistent. So he moving on to another opportunity.
We were talking about this before the show. That's the frustration with VCU sometimes, right? When you rotate that many guys, it can be hard to really carve out a significant amount of minutes, and sometimes young players get frustrated with that, and that's understandable. Yeah. I think that as far as off the court, I mean, everyone really liked Michael in the time that he was here, and all the best to him. It's disappointing to see him leave because it felt like he could have been a VCU guy.
Yeah.
But could really see him taking off and being successful after he transfers and being one of those guys that you look back on and say that was one that got away.
Yeah, 100%. So he's a Philly native. I'm curious if he's going to maybe go back somewhere closer to home. Looking to the next move, that'll be interesting to follow. I know St. Joseph's was in his final group of teams when he was committing to VCU.
That'd be tough if he stayed in conference. Yeah.
But we'll see. That'll be interesting to follow. And so that was our final point as far as the transfers that didn't work out too. We mentioned Marcus, who I think a big adjustment for him was getting used to the defensive system here, because coming from Washington, they play a zone system, and so going from that to not only man-to-man, but like a hyper-aggressive man-to-man that VCU plays, I think that was an adjustment for him earlier in the year. Plus, he had a groin injury early in the year, which I feel like hampered him a little bit as far as his shot, because he struggled shooting the ball from three early in the year a little bit. He had a little bit of a breakout game against Syracuse in battle for Atlantis. And then I think what helped him a little bit too was when he moved off the ball a little bit more when Ace came back. He had a couple good games in January, but he just wasn't consistent. And then his playing time kind of took a nosedive late in the year. Only played 2 minutes at Wake Forest.
Jaden's emergence was a big part of his minutes dipping. Right, Jaden played so well that you couldn't keep him off the court as the season wore on.
I think so too. Yeah, that was a big part of that. I agree too. And then Jimmy Nichols Jr. He came. We talked about before the show too. He had a lot of physical tools.
It's an interesting and kind of confounding case.
Yeah,
it's tough to put a finger on why he didn't work out in his few years at Providence. You said there was some injury issues at Providence, right?
Yeah, he had injury history. Like his last year at Providence, he missed the last several games because of eye surgery. And he had some other injuries early in his career as well, and missed some time. But he was a guy I know VCU was excited about because he kind of fits them over, VCU guy.
Physical tools are really there. He's an exciting athlete.
He, I think his freshman year, he had like 27 blocks. And then he shot the ball pretty well from three his junior year before he transferred. So as far as versatile bigs, he had that tool set. It just, for whatever reason, it didn't pan out. And vast majority of the limited playing time he did get was earlier in the year. He only played 8 games, only played one A-10 game against Dayton in February. Which was interesting because that one game he played 8 minutes. He had 3 blocks in 8 minutes. In that one game he played in an A-10, but then he didn't play at all the rest of the year. He wasn't even dressed at Wake Forest.
That's such a confusing to flash with that exciting and get a few blocks in such a short time span and then just nothing after that. I think that's a good example of the type of player that he was at VCU. He was just confounding. It seems like there was potential there, but he just never got enough minutes.
Yeah.
So it's tough to put a finger on what that is.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like I think it's just maybe a product of the environment of just college basketball in general. Just like there's a lot more transfers, and which means when there's a lot more transfers, that means there's gonna be a lot more that don't work out. Because for a guy like Marcus who came across the country he's a West Coast guy.
It feels
Portland
like
native.
free agency.
It does
these days, doesn't it?
Yeah. And so you can't. I don't think there's no party necessarily at fault. In any situations because a guy wants to see if it's a good fit. VC felt like it was a good fit for both these guys, and obviously it turned out for probably both parties. It didn't work out, and so
Marcus contributed. I think especially early in the season, like we talked about when Ace was out. He certainly served a purpose, and I think that there's probably no hard feelings there with him departing and just moving on to his next challenge. Jimmy is more confounding because that obviously didn't really work out, and he never really had a extended stretch of time where he served a purpose for this team. And he was one of those guys that you hoped felt like a perfect VCU reclamation project, right? And so there are a lot of reasons why that one's frustrating. All the best to both of those guys, though. We hope that they find the right next step in their careers.
For sure. And so looking ahead, again, mentioning 3 transfer, that's 3 open scholarships. So it'd be interesting to see who they feel. I touched on, I think for sure you're going to have to get another big, maybe a bigger big.
The transfer market is fun. It almost feels like, it makes me think of soccer.
Yeah.
I'm an Arsenal fan. You're a Manchester United fan. In the summer and in the January transfer window, it almost feels like we're getting to that point with college basketball where the transfer portal is like the same thing as the transfer market. Yeah. And it's exciting to look at all the new pieces that are out there because the grass isn't always greener, but there's always the rose-colored glasses, right? In that time, in that span where you think about people moving to new destinations and you start to paint a picture of how they can succeed. So it'll be fun to look at prospective transfer options for VCU this offseason.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously everyone comes with optimism too, like Jimmy and Marcus did last year. So that's kind of reason for that makes it exciting as well, because like, oh, the guy who, like, he did what, where, and that kind of adds to a little bit of the interest heading into next year too.
Who's the one that I was so Medley Bacon?
Oh yeah,
I was so excited about him. So it seemed like he had all the physical tools. It was this huge big, and then that
7-footer.
That one did not work out.
Yeah, no. But that's part of the transfer market. So it'll be fun to follow.
You can strike gold sometimes too.
Yeah, 100%. So we'll see if they are. But the 2 guys who are already inked, the true freshmen,
2 really exciting guys.
Very. We'll start with the local guy, Alfonso Billups, Class 4 State Player of the Year. I know you saw him play, and he's top 100 recruit. He can do a little bit of everything. Very versatile guy, 6'7". So what kind of maybe stood out the most to you from seeing him play?
Well, it was cool to see him play at the Siegel Center. First of all, because I saw him play recently in the Class 4 State Championship game. He's the Class 4 Player of the Year for Verina, which won a football state title and then went and won a basketball state title, and they're the first local public school to do that in the same school year. Yeah. So amazing year for them. So much talent over in the East End. And Billups is such a perfect example of that. He does a little bit of everything. He seems like the Vince replacement to me, that he would step into Vince's shoes. I think he could play a lot as a freshman right off the bat and get significant minutes because he's a really mature player. When I interviewed him earlier in this season, and I was talking to Michael Phillips, our editor, about this after the game. I asked him what your pro comparison was, and he said LeBron James. And so everyone, and Michael was saying, well, yeah, everyone in our generation says, they want to be like LeBron James. That's absolutely true. But there really are, when you see him play, I'm not comparing him to LeBron James, but there's similarities in the fact that he affects the game in so many different ways. Awesome activity defensively, so you really see why there's VCU interest. He can bring the ball up the floor. He can shoot it. Verina was deep and had a lot of guys that contributed, but he was the guy that when they needed to break a run, when they needed a bucket, everyone knew to put the ball in his hands. So a lot of command of that team, of a deep, talented team. Honestly, that kind of plays, I think, similar to how VCU wants to play. So it seems like a pretty seamless transition for me, from Verina to VCU. Late in that game, he had one of his teammates threw an alley-oop off the backboard to him in the state championship game, and it was a blowout game. I think it was like a 20-something point game at that point. And then there was a timeout after that, and he looked up to the crowd and said, "This is my city." So that was his celebration. I think I led with that. And it's awesome to see a local kid going to play at VCU already showing out on the Siegel Center floor. I think it's super exciting for everyone locally. The sky's the limit for him, man. He could be so good. There was one moment early in that game where it was kind of a choppy start to the game, and I think it was Loudoun County is the team they were playing. They were up early, and Verina kind of needed to settle the game down, and Billups backed his guy down, and you could just tell that it was one of those moments where he was like, all right, everybody settle down. I'm going to take command here. He backed his guy down, drew a help defender on the weak side, and then had a really nifty little kind of over-the-back pass to a cutting teammate under the basket. And that was one play where he was a creator, and that he wasn't a creator for his teammates a whole lot of that game because he was the one that needed to take on the scoring responsibility. But I think that that's the most exciting thing that I see in his game is that potential to really be like a point forward, point wing. He's a 3-4 hybrid that can do a little bit of everything on the floor, and he has that creative ceiling to really create for his teammates and be a super exciting offensive player. He said that his favorite thing to do on the court is chase down blocks. Then he had a couple of them in that game too. And his activity defensively is awesome. I'm sorry, I'm talking for a while here.
Oh, no.
I could talk for a while about offensive builds. Incredibly exciting player. Yeah. Be excited, Ram Nation. I can't. He's a candidate for All Metro Player of the Year. We're still in that decision-making process, but Class 4 State Player of the Year for a state championship team. He's one of the best players in the state. And we asked the Loudoun County coaches and players after that game, and they were like, yeah, that's one of, if not the best players we've ever played against.
Wow. Yeah, that speaks volumes. And yeah, I think it's just exciting, like you touched on too, a local guy going to VCU. There hasn't been a ton in recent history.
Back to Brandon Roselle.
Yeah. But you know,
won a state title at Highland Springs in 2007 and then went to VCU.
Yeah, and it's just really cool because it's like the next generation, because Brandon is on staff at VCU, so now he'll get a chance to work with Alfonso. So that's really cool to see. I think it's easy for the city and for the fans to get behind those guys who are you know from the area. So
some people may have heard Fats Billups as well, but there's still, the jury's kind of still out there because most of his teammates call him Fats, and that was his nickname as a baby. But when I interviewed him, when I talked to his coach too, his coach said that he's trying to push for Alf because he's not. It's like, you know, it's a childhood nickname that he's maybe not a huge fan of.
Right.
So I don't want to make a definitive statement on that one way or the other. A lot of people call him Fats, but from what I've heard from him, that's not his nickname of choice. So I don't think it's going to be like a Bones situation. But we'll see how that plays out. A lot of people do call him Fats. So if you hear Fats Billups, then that's Alfonso Billups.
Yeah. Hold off on calling him Fats when he gets to VCU.
We're gonna let him make that. People, that gets on my nerves sometimes, right? People, like, nicknames get impressed on people.
I know.
I don't know. You should be able to pick your own nickname.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That should be a you decision.
VCU's had some cool nicknames over the years, though. So between Ace and Bones, and it's so. But I'm totally, if he doesn't want to be called Fast, I totally get that too.
Did Doug Brooks? Did he have a nickname? I feel like I thought of Doug. Maybe just it was Dougie or something like that. I think, but I don't know. I think of him as one of the more fun players with a big persona.
Right.
He was worthy of some sort of nickname.
Yeah, it was that game. When he wore the hat, the winter hat, and there's like a Papa John's commercial of him wearing that hat now with Robbie Robinson.
That's awesome.
From the radio. So.
All-time VCU personality.
Yeah. And then the other spot.
We digress.
Well, of course, VCU had two spots for freshmen this year with Vince and Keyshawn as seniors. So the other spot that they filled last year was with Christian Furman, who was a bigger, more of a front court player, 6'10", from Pennsylvania.
Super exciting measurables. I don't know a lot about him.
Yeah, well, he's also versatile, big as far as like he can do a lot of things offensively as well. But then he has that size too at 6'10". I think they're gonna probably like wanting him to get a little bit bigger. He's only 200 pounds.
Okay.
But he was talking about rebounding. He set his school all-time career record for career rebounds this year, with 753 in his career.
Perhaps something that they identified in recruiting between Jalen and Christian that they needed to emphasize a little bit in those couple classes. Yeah,
100%. And he's also a top 100 guy too. So this class, just between those two guys, is really stand out. He's 93 in the 2.7 sports composite rating for the entire 2022 class. So.
Do you remember another VCU class with two top 100 guys? I don't want to make a definitive statement on that, but I don't remember one.
Yeah, I can't either. So VCU is definitely recruiting at a high level. I think just the success over the past couple of years, to kind of starting to get more of these types of guys. I think staff continuity helps with that, because you saw maybe the type of guys that Shaka and his staff are getting, and then second year of Wade, and then like now this staff is in place for 5 years. They've kind of established themselves, and now they're starting to get more to those types of guys. So
they seem to be really good at identifying their guys early, and building those relationships. I know they talked a lot about Ace when his family he lost his father. I believe his family was going through a traumatic time, and they were talking about on the broadcast during the Wake Forest game, because Ace was a big recruit. He had some other big offers. And they talked about the reason that he chose VCU was they were just always checking up on him to see how he was doing and make sure his family was hanging in there. And it's awesome to see from a guy, Mike Rhodes, that I think a lot of us think of as a player's coach, for that to be a really strong recruiting strategy for them is really building those relationships and it being a human being relationship, not just a basketball relationship, right?
Yeah, exactly. Whenever I talk to guys after they commit and ask them why they pick VCU, one of the things it seems like every single guy says is that that VCU was calling me more than everybody
That's
else.
What Alfonso said,
Yeah, and it's like, and that it wasn't just the assistant coaches. Like Rose was calling me, like Jamal Bryant was calling me, Jetty Byers was calling me, Brent Scott was calling me. So, guys that they want, they really work hard on it too. And so it's that work ethic. I think even though A10 is like a high mid-major league, if you want to call it that, like even still being a mid-major and you're competing against the UVAs and Virginia Techs and whoever else. And all the other guys they bring in have a lot of Power 5 offers too.
To that point, can we bring back the UVA home and home? A series?
I know.
It's been a few years now
Yeah,
that's been off. I have a lot of friends who went to UVA, and that's so much fun. And I think it's just good for basketball in the state when UVA and VCU play. So I don't know whose ear we have to get in about that, but we need to bring that back because that's a lot of fun.
Well, the last time they played a couple of years ago, which was like, I'll never forget because it like snowed and I was like treacherous driving back from UVA for that game up at UVA. But after that game, it was said that they want to continue to play. They just haven't, I guess, put it in place.
Both Tony and Mike have expressed support for making that a regular thing. Right?
Yeah, and even when they don't play, they usually, a lot of times they'll do the closed door scrimmages for the year against UVA.
Maybe
too.
That's why they haven't played over the last few years too, is because they want to almost have that closer relationship of doing the closed door scrimmages before the season starts.
Right. So, but yeah, it's fun. It's fun. I want to see, like, this is going off on a tangent. I want to see VCU play, like, UVA more, Virginia Tech more.
Definitely Tech more. The Tech UVA, this is tangential, but the Tech VCU series is fascinating.
Yeah.
They have played once in my lifetime. And it was 2013 when I think when Richmond came, when Tech came to the Richmond Coliseum.
Oh, yeah,
and there was like
the Governor's Classic.
There was a tournament, in Richmond. And VCU won that game pretty handily, and that's the only time. I'm born in 1995. That's the only time they played in my lifetime. And we need more VCU Tech games.
Yeah, I agree.
Tech's in a great spot right now with Mike Young, and so those would be really exciting games.
Yeah. So I hope that can subjectively hope that can get on the schedule.
Yes, for sure.
And I don't know. I'm just a fan. Like, I was being a Virginia native too. I'm a fan of in-state games. Like, I think it's just more fun. Like, that's why. Even though they're not in the same conference anymore, the VCU ODU game is always exciting to watch.
Absolutely.
I think in-state people enjoy seeing those in-state matchups, so I'm always
Mason's always fun. That's kind of a fun rivalry with I think a good bit of respect there.
Yeah, so I'm always an advocate for in-state games. So if you're listening, the schedule makers.
Yeah, whoever we need to get into.
So kind of moving on to wrap up here. We kind of had a verdict on the year. To me, I just feel like this year, we talked about they kind of overachieved. I think this is kind of a season of what could have been.
Yeah.
You talk about going all the way back to like Bones committing for the draft early, obviously that was a great move for him. And it's cool, very, very cool to see what he's doing in the NBA. But I think at the time, people were kind of surprised at that, and you would have guessed that he would have at least come back for one more year. So you think, okay, this team this year with Bones, with the healthy ace, with Jameer Watkins, just maybe
that team could have made a deep run in the NCAA tournament if it had Bones and Jameer on it this year.
Yeah. So you rewind back to a year ago this time, just maybe the outlook on this season back then I think that's part of maybe the season of what could have been.
Yeah.
But Bones in April, of course, declared for the draft, and obviously doing very well with the Nuggets now.
Watching him play a two-man game with Nikola Jokic the other night, that's still so awesome to watch that he's just stepped right in and contributed to the extent that he has.
It was very fun to see him play so well in Philly, too. That was like his homecoming game, and I saw Mike Singer at Denver Post reported that he had like 600 or 700 people there as far as family, so that was cool to see. And so that was one thing. And then the next month, unfortunately, Ace suffered his Achilles injury. That was like late May, so that was another thing.
Which ended up going about as well as it could, as far as him getting back and being able to contribute for much of the season.
Right. That was one thing. I think back then, just because we know how Achilles injuries goes, for some guys it's a year-long injury, so we weren't sure exactly how long he was going to be out. Again, like you said, that went probably as well as it could have.
Man, modern medicine, though. Guys are coming back quicker and quicker, it seems, from those Achilles injuries. It's not the death knell on your career. I'm thinking of like NFL running backs that we've seen come back from it. So from football to basketball and other sports, it doesn't seem to be like the death sentence on your career that it used to be an Achilles injury, that it could be even for young college athletes, that it could be a career ender. We're seeing more guys come back from it these days.
And Ace, he showed, even at the beginning, he was on a minutes restriction, but I think the first game he played like over 20 minutes.
Yeah, it didn't seem like much of a restriction.
And I don't think at any time this year he showed any ill effects, so that's great to see. He's able to come back pretty much at probably about almost as close to 100% as possible.
He's a great kid too.
Yeah.
It just seems like everyone loves playing with him and coaching him, and I've only heard good things about his influence off the court on everybody else.
Yeah, 100%. So that was one thing, unfortunately. And Jameer, you know, we fast forward to the fall, he gets hurt. Jan McCaffrey gets hurt. At the same time, you know, of what could have been, they still were nearly in position for that regular season title. Yeah. One win away, losing to St. Louis. Potentially one, probably 2 wins away from maybe making the NCAA tournament if they had made it to the A-10 final. Mm-hmm. So that's what could have been there. So just in multiple facets, it's just kind of what could have been. But I guess you could say that's every season, but I think this VCU was so close to kind of accomplishing some of those major goals as far as the regular season title, as far as making the NCAA tournament, but it just kind of slipped from their grasp a little bit.
It's difficult to evaluate, right? When you do exceed expectations, but you also get so close to what is at the end of the day the big goal every year for VCU basketball, right? That's where this program is at. It's getting into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
And if you get into the NCAA tournament, then I think of the season as a success, and if you don't, I think of it as a failure. Yeah. And I think that's maybe not a fair precedent to be set on a program of this size, but that's where it's at because of the success in the last couple decades.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult to evaluate because you got so close to that goal and you felt like you were a game or 2 away from it, but at the same time, you outperformed expectations. And there's a lot to be proud of with a young group this year. I think back to the Richmond game at the Siegel Center with how well they played in that second half. This young group played fantastic against some teams in that instance that were a lot more experienced than they were. So it's a young group that grew up fast. And I think you can take a lot of pride and a lot of optimism in what those young kids can do going forward.
Yeah, 100%. So this is going to be fun to watch. It's going to be, again, with the transfers, it's going to be a busy offseason.
We might have to do some offseason shows.
Yeah, we should.
We get a few transfers. Then we might have to kind of throw them in there and talk about that. Because it is, the transfer portal is exciting. It's almost like free agency these days. So maybe we can get a chance to talk about that going forward.
We should, 100%. So you can follow all those happenings and also make sure to follow Zach's excellent preps coverage as well.
Oh, thanks,
at richmond.com/sports. Thank you for watching this season. And we can't wait maybe for an off-season show, but definitely next season as well. Thank you.